Hey everyone, it's Zeep, and I've been going to Disney California Adventure more recently, especially Avengers Campus, which originally was the Bugs Land area a couple years ago, which has had me thinking about lost childhood memories. Theme parks are subject to change, but what happens when those theme parks are not changed, but really just completely abandoned? And that's what we're covering today. A couple abandoned theme parks that were left by their parent company, never to come back again, destined to rot and be left in the dustbin of history. I'm Zeepsterd. If you want a sequel to this, get this to 5,000 likes, and also, please, subscribe. We grow every day. Let's get right to it. But first, a message from our sponsor. Listen, I'm Zeepsterd. I'm like the master of cool, but nothing is cooler than being a mech firing against another mech that's heavily armed with a rifle. Mech Arena is a fast-paced PvP mech shooter with chaotic mayhem meant for everyone. Play an action-packed game from start to finish in like 5 minutes. If you really want fast-paced action, play on some of the small, tighter maps built for tactics and constant encounters. It's not really like a reflex first-person shooter, but it also doesn't feel like a slow mech game as well. It's just right. May's main event is the Biohazard Brawl, a mech melting event featuring fierce deathmatch and free-for-all tournaments in grimy, industrial-themed maps. The big new reward is Eclipse, a legendary scout mech that packs a punch, has awesome stealth capabilities, and can make itself immune to the nastiest debuffs, including EMP. We even have weapons such as the Fusion Cannon, which is a new assault weapon that's rapid fire, with also a 12 energy variant of the Fragment Gun, a close quarters monstrosity. We also have Neve, a gleeful legendary close quarters pilot, and you can even get the Hazmat skin for an instant paint splatter style. And only with Season 19's Battle Pass, you can pick up the Dust Devil skin for the Shadow Mech. It's completely free to play on Android, iOS, and PC right now, and you can use my personal link or scan my QR code to get bonuses worth of $30. We are talking about one skin, one amateur crate, and 5,000 credits to help kickstart your game. And if you're quick, you can add me to your friends, and we can play some matches together, so don't wait around. Thanks to Mech Arena for sponsoring this video. Ghost Town Village. In Maggie Valley, North Carolina, there's an abandoned Wild West themed amusement park. It was a theme park on top of a mountain, also known as the Ghost Town in the Sky. With an elevation of 4,650 feet, it was promoted as North Carolina's Mile High Theme Park. A very unique location to put a theme park, it opened on May 1st, 1961. And closed down in 2016. I mean, in the beginning it was fairly popular for the Carolinas. It averaged around 500,000 people per year, with the park being an economic driver for the entire town. All throughout Ghost Town, there'd be your typical rides that you would find at, like, say, a fair, but there were also shows that really embraced the entire Western idea.
Every minute is action-packed as you experience the excitement of the Old West. Ghost Town offers a day of fun and thrills for the entire family.
You see, back in the 1960s, Western movies were extremely popular. To put it simply, people thought cowboys were cool. The park even hosted several TV Western stars, staging hourly gunfights all throughout the main street of the park. Here's the thing, the idea of a Western theme park wasn't exactly original. I mean, you have Knott's Berry Farm back in Southern California, which really embraces this feature. What makes this idea so unique is that Ghost Town was on top of a mountain. Even just being at the theme park, you'd be able to see clouds at times descend over. After parking your car and buying a ticket, visitors would have to ride a chairlift or an incline in order to reach the park. Being divided into different towns with different themes, Ghost Town was similar in Disneyland in a way, as sections in the park were divided into several towns, all of them with different themes, including one which was titled Indian Village, another called Mountain Town, a mining town, and the Old West Street. In Old West Town, there would be can-can dancers, a jail, various businesses, and of course, the place where all the gunfights happened. There were roller coasters, bumper cars, merry-go-rounds, among typical things you'd find at a theme park. So besides the gimmick of being in the Old West on top of a mountain, what else was special here? You see, over time, people just lost interest in cowboys. In Hollywood, the westerns began to die off, and meanwhile, the theme park itself would begin to have breakdowns on a regular basis. In fact, in multiple instances, visitors would get stuck on the chairlift on the way over to the theme park, being unable to even start their day. Combined with a lack of maintenance over the course of a couple decades, it was decided by the owners to eventually sell the park in 2002, with it reopening back up again in 2007 after millions of dollars were spent on renovations. You want to know the kicker though, guys? The millions of dollars spent on renovations wasn't even enough. I'm not talking about it in a way to even draw in crowds, I'm talking about it in a way that the rides still weren't even working. with rides regularly breaking down and a good amount of them not even being able to function for multiple months. Many visitors grew upset. They would leave the park and tell others not to go, with the attendance declining year after year. Things didn't get better for the park. In 2008, the financial crisis lowered even more attendance for the park, and eventually in 2009, after over $11 million had been spent, Ghost Town filed for bankruptcy. The park would even struggle to stay open. Some days, the park would just be closed in general to try and preserve some money. Things got so bad, the park even asked its hometown for money, failing to secure a loan from the bank, and asking a dire need for help as they didn't want to have over 200 people lose their jobs. A private investor gave them the money, but by the end of 2009, things were not looking good. Throughout the 2010s, multiple attempted reopenings were conducted to try and revitalize any type of interest to the park. However, all these efforts were futile. In days when the park would not open, the theme park was left without security, leading to vandalism and additional damage, alongside theft. Finally, in 2016, the park was closed. However, this did not mean the exact end to the park. In the past few years, there have been attempts to try and rename the park. However, as with everything before, all attempts have been futile. In 2022, the Ghost Town owner, Alaska Presley, died at the age of 98, and following her passing, the future ownership of Ghost Town has been largely debated upon via various lawsuits. As of 2023, there's a lawsuit still out to try to determine the fate of Ghost Town. But anyone who actually goes to the park themselves can see what the fate really is right now. It is abandoned. Various behind-the-scenes objects used for the shows all throughout the decades have been vandalized, destroyed, alongside multiple coasters that are just left empty. It is a literal ghost town now. The chairlift used to go up to the mountain is, of course, completely inoperable. The only way to reach the theme park is to hike a mountain, but as with the case of when Ghost Town was actually alive, no amount of effort is going to lead to anyone actually showing up to that theme park. The name fits it. It is a ghost town. Nara Dreamland. In July of 1955, Disneyland opened its gates to much success. It became such a worldwide phenomenon that millions flew from all over the world to even be in the park. As classic with Disney magic, people left the park inspired to follow their dreams. To one visitor, Kenizo Matsuo, he left the park believing that his home of Japan needed one for themselves. So Matsuo contacted Walt Disney, and in fact, over the time period of the late 1950s to early 1960s, him and Walt Disney collaborated to create a Japanese park. Problem was, when it came to licensing issues, Walt Disney and Matsuo were incapable of agreeing, eventually leading to Walt Disney to pull support from the park. Originally going to be titled Nara Disneyland, the park was quickly renamed to Nara Dreamland. Instead of using Disney mascots as originally intended, the park would create their own mascots. You see, by the time Walt Disney pulled his support, much of the park had already been completed, and a lot of it looked similar to Disneyland. There was their own version of Main Street USA, the iconic Sleeping Beauty Castle as the hub, and it also had its own style of the Matterhorn ride called the Bobsleigh, with a skyway running through it, as Matterhorn was originally designed with. Yeah, they went really far and beyond to try to make this seem like Disneyland. At the time, Disneyland had yet to expand into other parks and other territories, and the park actually did pretty well at first because of this. In Asia, if you wanted to go to Disneyland, you'd have to travel all the way to America. Why do that trip if you could just go to a knockoff place very similar to Disneyland, located in Japan? At the park's peak, it had 1.7 million visitors a year. With its own mascots, Ron-chan and Dory-chan, it wasn't Disneyland, but it was close enough. Many of the people visiting Dreamland had never been to Disneyland before. They didn't see a knockoff, they saw something of fantasy, of originality. Their version of Fantasyland was very similar to Disneyland's version of Fantasyland. There was a teacup ride, a carousel, a boat ride that would take you around. To some, they may say it was a ripoff, but you have to keep in mind, Walt Disney helped develop this amusement park with the intention of it being the first foreign Disneyland park. For over 20 years, the park would be successful. With multiple roller coasters and vehicle rides, it was pretty on par to the actual thing. That was until the actual thing came to Japan.
Now, there's Tokyo Disneyland. There's Pluto, hamming it up for all those Japanese cameras. There's Chip. There's Davy Crockett. You sure we're not in Anaheim?
If you ask.
Yes, Nara Dreamland may have had their own adventure land, their own fantasy land, but here's the key thing that was missing. They didn't have Mickey Mouse, they didn't have Goofy, and for sure, they did not have Donald Duck. In 1983, Tokyo Disneyland opened in Japan. Similar to Disneyland, it had Adventureland, Westernland, Critter Country, Tomorrowland, Fantasyland, and Toontown. It was finally the real deal, Disneyland. Located in Tokyo, Japan, it had a severe advantage over Nara Dreamland, which was located in a much less populated city. As the 1980s and 1990s went on, fewer and fewer people would come to Dreamland. By the 2000s, Tokyo Disney Sea had opened up, as well as Universal Studios Japan, which was in Osaka, only 25 miles away from Nara Dreamland. This would just make Dreamland's attendance numbers even worse, averaging around 400,000 visitors a year. Here's something I gotta stress. Not every single ride from Dreamland was a knockoff from a Disneyland ride. They had some originality. They had this ride such as the Haunted Maze, which had a witch a part of it and advertised devils being after you throughout the entire ride. Kind of a cool concept. Once again, they also had their own mascots, which were based off of British guards. Of course, I never went to Nara Dreamland when it was active, but maybe there was something more there than just your average rip-off Disneyland park. At the end of the day though, some forms of originality was not enough to keep the park afloat. By 2004, multiple stores around the park began to close down, and attractions began to rust. With the quality going down, by 2006, the park had closed down for good. But here's the thing, for a full decade after the park's closure, it would be left abandoned. There was no security around the park. People would just walk in and see the remnants of what was once successful. Vegetation had begun to grow over the park, leading to these very dystopian type of images. The remaining structures were left to decay. By 2013, the land's ownership was left to the city of Nara. By 2015, the land had been sold in an auction, with the plan being to demolish the park. Prior to its closure, multiple videos were made of the park at nighttime and its very creepy vibes. However, for me, I don't really find it as creepy as others do, more saddening. And I say this because I can't help but think about this video. There was a video of a person on the Jungle Cruise, a comedian on the ride, doing his job, giving a show to an audience of people who came to Dreamland. However, when you look at the video, you see that there's no one else on the Jungle Cruise boat besides the guy filming it. This worker really gave it his all, despite the fact there was no one in the audience. To me, Dreamland wasn't originally supposed to be a knockoff, it just turned out that way. I'll even go as far to state that there was spirit and passion there. It's just eventually, that passion would not be enough to keep the park alive. Disney's River Country. A couple months ago, I stayed at Disney's Fort Wilderness Resort and Campground to visit Disney World. I had been told stories before about this place called Disney's River Country, the first water park at Walt Disney World. It was located along the shores of Bay Lake, which was near the campground I was staying at, with the water park being themed as an old-fashioned swimming hole, one inspired and taking place in the universe of Tom Sawyer. Just in time for the summer of 1976, River Country opened its doors to great demand. Even Gerald Ford, the president of the time, had their daughter go there and take the first slide down. It was the world's first fully themed water park, and it was quite impressive. Remember how I said this water park was right next to the lake? Well, that proved to be an important factor, because a good amount of the water that was used at the park came directly from that lake. The water would be filtered and pumped down to the swimming hole, where a lot of the water slides would conclude at. There was a trail that would take you through a swamp. Alongside so many fun water slides, it was a great hit, but that's the problem. It was too much of a hit.
Typhoon Lagoon is our answer to River Country because River Country was getting so full. River Country in the 70s, when it opened, was revolutionary for its time. It was the first themed water park around. In fact, we've compared it to what Disneyland was in 1955 to other amusement parks. It became extremely popular, and we just decided to build another one bigger and better.
The park could only hold around 4,700 people per day. You see, River Country was a 5-acre park. It was tiny. Disney needed a solution to this as their main theme parks continued to grow. Eventually, in 1989, Disney would open up a new 56-acre park titled Typhoon Lagoon. and it was a hit. Finally, a place where parkgoers could actually go. By 1995, Disney also revealed a new water park called Blizzard Beach, which once again was way more popular than Disney's River Country. Disney's River Country was more of a hassle to keep open. Why bother anymore with this tiny park when there were other water parks at Disney World that were way better, much bigger, and were newer? The thing about River Country is that it opened up in 1976, and ever since then, the park failed to have any major updates. In November of 2001, the water park closed for the winter season, with it originally expecting to reopen in the spring of 2002. However, by the spring of 2002, a Disney World spokesman stated that the park would not reopen. A couple years went by. River Country was left abandoned. Soon, the Florida swamps began to swarm River Country. The only thing protecting the park would be a fence that many people would simply just climb over to explore the abandoned area. As vegetation continued to consume the water park, Disney tried to think about what to do with the area. In 2005, Disney officially announced that River Country would not be reopening. For the next 17 years, the water park would be left abandoned, with ideas of hotels replacing the area, coming up, and then being swiftly cancelled over and over again. What makes it even more eerie is that, at the end of the day, River Country would shut its doors with a theme song. In the 17 years that followed, the River Country closing theme would still play even in the abandoned theme park. Power wasn't cut off from the water park, and even the River Country water tower hanged around for a couple years after the park's closure. The obvious theory for the park's closure was that there were other Disney water parks that were much bigger and much more grand. The logical step for River Country's end, it couldn't keep up. However, there have been multiple conspiracy theories surrounding this park, and it has to do with 3 different deaths that happened while the park was open. For one, an 11-year-old boy developed a brain infection from the water in the year 1980. A very rare infection. Most people have not blamed Disney for this death, as this disease can be found in multiple freshwater lakes in warm weather, and is more of a chance type of infection. With the other deaths at the water park being from drowning, one in 1982 and the other in 1989. The theory goes is that due to its proximity to the lake, the water was contaminated and extremely dangerous, but despite that one instance in 1980, I failed to see any more evidence that can even support this claim. Eventually, in March of 2018, Disney announced a new resort hotel that would replace most to basically all remaining structures at the water park with a luxurious resort titled Reflections, a Disney lakeside lodge. It was slated to have 900 hotel rooms and was set to open in the year 2022, featuring multiple Disney characters that one would associate with the wilderness, such as Bambi, Brother Bear, and the Princess and the Frog. Problem is that in 2020, a grand worldwide pandemic occurred, leading to Disney to halt the construction. Suddenly, the 2022 opening date was delayed. And the thing is, if you try to look things up about it, Disney has wiped it off all of its websites. It is very likely that this idea has been scrapped since the pandemic. Since mid-2022, construction has been completely stopped. So what we're left here is not a water park, but basically an abandoned area that Disney doesn't really know what to do with anymore. Once the first themed water park in the entire world, it is a complete shell of the fun memories of long ago. In 1954, Disney released the film 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, a movie about sea monsters, and most importantly, a giant squid. It was pretty cool. So cool that Disney made a ride about it, released in the year 1971. Titled 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Submarine Voyage, it was basically Disney World's counterpart to Disneyland's Submarine Voyage, which would eventually become the Finding Nemo ride. When it first released, it was incredibly impressive. Animatronics were underwater, in scenarios that were unlike anything ever seen before. Guests were put into submarines, sitting below water level, taking on an adventure that would be kind of creepy. The submarines were cramped, incredibly claustrophobic, and it would get really dark there, especially in sections of the ride. It was definitely one of the scariest rides at the park. 20,000 Leagues had a submarine that had a bronze finish to it, accompanied with narration and organ music from the movie accompanied behind it. The attraction began with typical fish being viewed on the ride, but as the submarine delves deeper, it gets a little spookier. You get the product of a sea serpent, and of course, a giant squid attacking your submarine near the end of the ride in a creepy segment. It was very similar to its California counterpart, in its underwater scenes, and even in its narration, except the giant squid was more prominently featured. The ride was a favorite. The problem is that it was incredibly expensive to maintain. And it also had a low loading capacity for a ride its size, meaning that it took a while to get on the ride. Without advance notice, the ride closed on September 5th, 1994. The submarines remained there for a couple years, to be displayed to guests who were walking by the lagoon. Eventually, they were removed. Sitting in the lagoon for almost 10 years, the animatronics remained, rotting away. When it was time to finally demolish the ride, images were taken of the animatronics, and if you want to know something about this video that represents all of it, I'd like to show you the sea serpent, a famous image that speaks to abandoned theme parks everywhere. Sure, it could bring so many memories to so many people everywhere, but at the end of the day, something can happen that can bring it all to an end, and what's left is a rotted shell of what originally brought people life.